in accordance with the Obama administration's plan. And right now, Washington insisted that sanctions should be introduced against the country they helped create. So this fixation on trying to oust this or that dictator, an authoritarian or totalitarian leader, is well known to us, and we know how it ends. A successful ouster of a dictator is for me very hard to remember. If you have any examples, I'd be glad if you could share them with me. On Syria, as our president has stated on many occasions, we are not trying to put our hopes on anyone or on Bashar al-Assad or anyone else, as they do in Libya right now. We want them to sit at one negotiating table. As the UN Security Council resolution states, they have all to gather together. This has to be an inclusive intra-Syrian dialogue. And as the UN Security Council resolution states, the future of Syria has to be determined by the Syrians themselves, without any exemptions. The most important thing is not to eliminate a political leader from the chessboard, so to speak, but to agree on how the country is going to be built. It has to be democratic, it has to be secular, which is something the High Negotiations Committee speaks against. All ethnic and religious groups have to fill safe agencies, and only if such a consensus is achieved, which has to be done through elaborating a new constitution, will the issues related to certain personalities be settled very efficiently without any tragic consequences either for the country or for the people. Thank you. Kommersant newspaper, please. Your question. Thank you, Yelena Chernenko, Kommersant newspaper. I've got a question to Secretary Tillerson. Have you talked today about the alleged interference of Russia into the American election? In what way do you think Russia's actions are different from the American actions in cyber security? In accordance with what the American media say, we know that the Iranian nuclear program was compromised by American-created Stuxnet virus. Right now, the US is trying to prevent the North Korea from happening using the same means. And another question to both ministers. A working group has been set up. Are you talking about resuming the work of the bilateral presidential commission? Do you plan to do that? Thank you.
We touched only briefly on the issue of cybersecurity, and in particular on the challenges that it is placing on everyone in terms of a new threat, an emerging threat. But I think I do make a distinction when cyber tools are used to interfere with the internal decisions among countries as to how their elections are conducted. That is one use of cyber tools. Cyber tools to disrupt weapons programs, that's another use of the tools. And I make a distinction between those two. Clearly, this is an issue that has emerged in our time, for which we have yet, as an international community, come to some conclusion around how we want to respond to that. And so there will be further discussions, and it is on the agenda, and it is in the agenda that Foreign Minister Lavrov passed to me for us to have further discussions in the future.
Я могу только подтвердить, что
I can only confirm that we are both interested in close cooperation on you have probably heard we said that on many occasions. 18 months ago, in October 2015, we proposed to the Obama administration, given its concern about the activities of the so-called Russian hackers they started to pursue all over the world, without resorting to the legal procedures that exist between Russia and the US, they started to detain these hackers and prosecute them after extraditing them from third countries. Back then, we said that we were not interested in our citizens being involved in these crimes. Therefore, we suggested that a special bilateral mechanism should be created that would exchange information in real time about anyone trying to breach the international or national norms of both Russia and the US. The Obama administration refused this proposal of ours. They didn't respond, but then at the end of the Obama administration in November last year, they proposed that we should meet. Certainly, our relevant government agencies agreed, but at the last moment, the Obama administration changed their mind because they were probably very, very interested in undermining the American-Russian relations before the arrival of new administration in power. That's why we once again confirmed this interest of ours today. This is a relevant matter, and that is why we suggested that our contacts should be resumed at the level of special envoys of the US administration and the Russian president, and also contacts at the level of relevant authorities. We feel that this time the result of these efforts might be different, leading to the establishment of new channels of communication and cooperation. And what is your second question? The Bilateral Presidential Commission? No, we have not yet touched upon this matter. It has been buried, so to speak, but maybe it might be resuscitated. Still, we've got channels to discuss some serious issues in our bilateral relations. It might be not under this umbrella structure. No, it might be in a different format. We have designated special persons who will sit down in quite common manner to look at our grievances, to look into those, and to look into how we can overcome these difficulties that exist.
Thank you. Secretary Tillerson, did you discuss today with President Putin or Foreign Minister Lavrov sanctions or other concessions that the United States might make in exchange for a change in behavior from the Russian government? And also, speaking about what you just answered previously, did you present to President Putin or the Foreign Minister specific evidence the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election? And to Foreign Minister Lavrov, if an independent investigation finds the Assad government attacked his own people with chemical weapons, what will Russia do? President Putin says there's an effort to blame Assad and plant evidence. Did you present that evidence to Secretary Tillerson today? And would Russia refuse to consider to agree to any circumstance that results in the ousting of Bashar al-Assad?
We discussed no change in the status of sanctions that have been in place with Russia as a result of certain actions taken in Ukraine, as you know. I think as to the question of the interference with the election, that is fairly well established in the United States, and I think that has been spoken to on the Hill as well with the Congress, and it is a serious issue. It's one that we know is serious enough to attract additional sanctions, and so we are mindful of the seriousness of that particular interference in our elections, and I'm sure that Russia is mindful of it as well.
Государственный секретарь.
Well, State Secretary hasn't threatened to use new sanctions. He hasn't threatened us at all. We have had a frank discussion about the issues on our agenda, and unfortunately we've got some difficulties with regard to the majority of those issues. Now, as for the chance that this investigation reveals the government's implication in chemical attacks, it's all a hypothetical. We do not want to speculate. We see how speculation can bring results. We see some hysterical statements from the House of Representatives, from the Senate, after the airstrike against the airbase. We do not want to speculate on what's really important, on the serious matter of the use of chemical weapons, on trying to exonerate anyone, on the attempts at staging an attack with the use of chemical weapons. What we want is to establish the truth and full compliance with American legislation, the Russian laws, the legislation, the laws of any normal country. But the principle of innocent until proven guilty has to be respected. Today, we send an appeal to The Hague to conduct an unbiased, transparent investigation. But should there be attempts at dragging on this investigation, we'll have to make the necessary conclusions. Now, as for the allegations that the U.S. government has irrefutable proof that we interfered with the electoral campaign, I have to say once again that we have not seen any facts, even hints at facts. We have not seen any evidence. No one has shown us any evidence, even though we have requested on many occasions that these evidence has to be produced to us to support the allegations, the accusations we hear. We do understand that there are many people who want to undermine our relations, to pursue their internal or external political interest, but these are just games with evil ends. We want to hear concrete proof and then we'll respond accordingly. Thank you. RIA Novosti, please. Good evening. RIA Novosti Agency, Polina Chenisova, question to both ministers. The U.S. has sent a strike group with an aircraft carrier, Kurt Vinson. Has this issue been raised during the talks? And what are the risks this step might entail for the region? And a question for Secretary Tillerson. If this group has been sent to the Korean Peninsula, does this signify that the U.S. has some plans for military intervention in North Korea? Thank you.
The Carl Vinson strike group is routinely in the Pacific Ocean. It's in the Pacific Theater. And its movements in the Pacific are made in a way that's planned by the military planners. There is no particular objective in its current course. The Vinson sails up and down the Pacific routinely, and so I would not read anything into the Carl Vinson's current locations.
Ну, я только могу повторить, что мы обсуждали.
The only thing I can say is that, among other issues, we have discussed the situation on the Korean Peninsula as well as around it. As far as I understand, given all the nuances, we still have a common determination to resolve this issue through peaceful means, to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through diplomatic talks. There are certain efforts undertaken by the participants of what used to be called the six-party talks. We also have ideas of our own, just as our Chinese counterparts do. We believe that we've got to rally around the cause of finding peaceful solution to this issue. And the last question from the American side. Thank you.
With CBS News.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, before these meetings, you said you believed Russia was either incompetent or complicit in these chemical weapons attacks? After your extensive meeting with both Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov, do you know which one that is, and what concrete thing can be done to rebuild that lack of trust? And Minister Lavrov, if I could indulge you to answer in English, if you would, sir. President Trump has called Bashar al-Assad an animal. This is the leader your government continues to back. Can you tell us how long Russia will be willing to risk the lives of its soldiers and spend its money to protect him?
With respect to Russia's complicity or knowledge of the chemical weapons attack, we have no firm information to indicate that there was any involvement by Russian forces into this attack. What we do know, and we have very firm and high confidence in our conclusions, that the attack was planned, carried out by the regime forces at the direction of Bashar al-Assad.
Могу только подтвердить еще раз, что
I can only say once again that just as in the case with the so-called Russian hackers and the chemical incidents in Syria, we would very much like to get some concrete evidence, not just words. So far, we have not seen any facts. In Syria, we are acting at the request of the legitimate government of a country which is a member of the United Nations. This country is under no sanctions of the UN Security Council. We are acting there in order to fight terrorism. And it is in our interests to prevent Damascus from being engulfed by ISIS and the al-Nusra Front. If you look at the facts, over the last 18 months, the coalition set up by the Obama administration did almost nothing to achieve the objective that it had stated when being established. It had not fought consistently against the al-Nusra Front or ISIS until the Russian airspace forces were deployed in Syria. And even after this deployment of our forces, the US-led coalition under the Obama administration only performed strikes against certain posts held by ISIS. And it was always sparing the al-Nusra Front. And we've got some suspicions. We think that the al-Nusra Front is still chaperoned and spared to resort to Plan B, to overthrow the Assad regime with force. We know how this is going to end because we saw similar situations in Libya and Iraq, and we do hope that the people will prevail who know how to learn from history. Now, as for who is responsible for the crimes committed in Syria, we've got to look into that. But as one American counterpart said, there will be time for everything. We've got to set priorities. And recently we've heard new priorities from Washington saying that ISIS is priority #1. And as Mr. Spicer has said, we have the resources to defeat ISIS without doing anything to the Assad regime. This is the same thing John Kerry had told me. The US administration, he said, was convinced that ISIS was a more serious threat and a more important objective than the Assad regime. So I think we think along the same lines. We have to see the common threats. They are apparent. And if we are to fight ISIS, if we are to emerge victorious from this fight without ousting the regime, when ousting the regime, this is no guarantee that we are going to defeat ISIS. On the contrary, ISIS might emerge victorious if we oust the regime. So we should be guided by common sense. Thank you, not by emotion. Colleagues, this is the end of the press conference. Thank you for participating. Thank you.